At the reading of the will, my parents beamed as the attorney passed a check for $10 million to Marissa. Then they turned toward me and said, "Go make your own." I didn't react. No tears, no expression. I just stared at the polished wood of the table, pretending I couldn't hear the pounding of my heartbeat. And then, everything shifted. An older man in a charcoal suit rose to his feet. "There's one more document," he said, carefully opening a creased envelope, the kind my grandfather used for special letters. I recognized his handwriting right away. My mother's expression dropped, my father's fingers twitched, and Marissa's gaze sharpened. That envelope was the beginning of it all. It cracked open the first piece of a truth they'd worked hard to bury, and it all led back to a place I hadn't stepped foot in for over a year. My grandfather's ranch, just beyond the edge of Fairwood, where the breeze used to sound like comfort, but now felt heavy with memories. I hadn't visited since early last spring, just before he passed away. Strange how a place once so familiar could suddenly feel distant. As I stepped out of the car, the gravel shifted beneath my boots. The wind chimes on the porch, once a cheerful background to long afternoons and sun-steeped tea, now rang like echoes from another time. I paused before knocking. The white paint on the door was still chipped, same as always. The old magnolia tree still leaned awkwardly to the east, but nothing about the house felt warm anymore. When the door creaked open, I half expected silence. Instead, I heard, "So, you finally came around." My grandmother's voice hadn't softened with time, still sharp like it could cut through steel. She stood with arms folded, jaw tight. I froze for a second, hoping to see something in her eyes, even the smallest flicker of kindness or surprise, but there was nothing but frost. "Grandma, what's happening?" I asked, stepping a little closer. "They told me you didn't want to be involved, said you had moved on, had better things to do," she said. Her voice trembled for a moment, then turned firm again. "He called for you every day, Isla, every day from his bed." I felt my mouth go dry. "That's not true. I called. I stopped by in March." Marissa answered the door and told me no one was home. Her eyes narrowed. "We were home. We never left." The silence after that was thick and sharp. Then, without saying anything else, she turned and walked back inside. I followed her, feeling like the house itself was holding its breath. A moment later, she returned holding a cracked leather notebook. "This is the number he kept dialing," she said, handing it over. I recognized the writing the instant I saw it, blocky, careful, with a slight right tilt. It was his, but the number written down wasn't mine. "Grandma, this isn't my number," I said, frowning. "Not even close. I've had the same one since college." She stared at the paper, her forehead creasing as she tried to make sense of it. "They told us you'd changed it, that you didn't want to be found, that you were embarrassed by us." "No," I said, stepping back until my shoulder hit the wall. "That's not true. They lied to you. They kept me away, on purpose." Her hands began to tremble. She eased herself down into the old armchair by the fireplace, the one with the faded blue flowers, as if her legs couldn't carry the weight of it all anymore. "They told me the service was at noon," I whispered. "I showed up and the church was empty." She looked up slowly, her face pale. "It was at 9, she said quietly. "They told everyone you never came, that you didn't care." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I would never have missed it. Not for anything. The room fell into silence, a silence so full it rang in my ears. And then something inside me broke. My chest tightened, my eyes burned. I sank down beside her and gripped her hand like I used to when I was little. "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't even know he was ill until it was too late." Her tone softened as she ran her fingers gently across the back of my hand. "What matters is, we know the truth now. We didn't move for a long time. The stillness between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted with everything we hadn't said. The mantel clock ticked louder than it used to, each second stretching. Outside, a gust of wind scattered dry leaves across the porch, rustling like old memories. At last, Grandma stood. Her fingers were shaking slightly, but there was something fierce in her expression I hadn't seen in years. "I'm calling them," she said. "Calling who?" I asked. She didn't reply. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and picked up the old rotary phone mounted to the wall, the one Grandpa had always insisted on keeping, and started dialing. Each turn of the dial clicked with purpose, like the final strokes of a story waiting to be told. I watched her hands, thinner now, lined with time, but unwavering in their motion. When the call connected, her voice went flat and sharp. "Lena, I need you, Calvin, and Marissa at the house, now." A muffled voice tried to answer, but she cut it off. "No, this can't wait. Be here within the hour." She hung up without another word, then turned toward me. "The attorney is coming too," she said. I blinked. "Granddad's lawyer?" She gave a firm nod. "Yes, your grandfather left some instructions, specific ones. He made it clear they were to be read only when everyone was present. So that's what we're going to do." I didn't respond, I just gave a small nod. There wasn't anything else to say. For the next hour, I sat quietly at the corner of the kitchen table, running my fingertip along the worn edge of the wood. This was the same table where Granddad used to sit with his coffee, flipping through science magazines I'd send him during my time at university. It was right here he first asked about my research on bee navigation. This was where I once told him I wanted to study plant cognition, and he didn't scoff or change the subject. Everything in the room looked the same, the faded curtains, the quiet hum of the old fridge, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Footsteps sounded on the porch, followed by the doorbell. Grandma gently rested her hand on my shoulder. "Stay here. I'll let you know when it's time." From the kitchen doorway, I listened as they arrived one after another. My mother's voice rang out, saccharine as ever. "Oh wow, it still smells just like it used to in here." My father's tone followed, calm and detached. I thought all of this had already been settled. Then Marissa's impatient sigh. "Are you kidding? This couldn't have waited until the estate was finalized?" A pause, and then my grandmother's voice, more cutting than I'd ever heard it. "Take a seat. Mr. Graham Callister is on his way. He'll be reading Nolan's final instructions." I could picture their expressions from the other room. Puzzled, uneasy, maybe even a little irritated. They had no idea I was in the house, no clue what was coming. And truthfully, neither did I. But somewhere inside, I hoped, just once, that someone would finally say the thing I had always carried silently. That whatever it was they'd given me all these years, it wasn't love. That silence, the shutting out, the twisting of truth, those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. The front door creaked again, followed by a new voice, even and professional. The lawyer. "This won't take long," he said, "but it must be handled correctly." That was my signal. From the living room, Grandma called out, "Isla, come in now." I stood up, my heart thudding hard, and walked from the kitchen into the living room. 3 heads turned at once, their eyes locked on me, and I watched their expressions unravel in real time. My mother's smile faltered and froze. My father's jaw tightened. Marissa went pale. The air felt charged, like it might crackle. They weren't just surprised to see me. They were rattled. All 3 of them stared. My mother blinked like she was seeing something impossible. My father tugged at his collar, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. Marissa's lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked like someone had snatched the script from her mid-speech. I stood tall. If they were hoping I'd shrink away, they were going to be disappointed. Grandma motioned toward the empty armchair across from them. I walked over and took a slow seat, keeping my breath calm. Mr. Callister, the attorney, gave me a brief nod, polite, unreadable, and reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This," he began, "is the final will and testament of Nolan R. Ellery, recorded and sealed under his direction. In addition to the formal documents, he included a personal letter to be read aloud." No one said a word. He cleared his throat and began. "To my wife, Miriam Ellery," he read, "I leave our family property, the ranch, the house, along with a fund set aside for her care and well-being. She knows where to find everything else. Grandma didn't flinch. The lawyer turned the page. To my granddaughter, Isla Ellery. The room seemed to press in tighter. I leave the Ellery Research Annex, located at 317 Laurel Creek Road in Fairwood, including all laboratory equipment, grant funding, active projects, registered patents, and intellectual property currently held under Ellery Innovations. A sharp breath echoed from across the room. Not mine. My mother's eyes snapped toward Marissa. I kept my hands in my lap, steady. Mr. Callister continued. Mr. Callister went on. And finally, the remaining estate, including financial assets, investments, and retirement accounts, shall be split evenly between my two granddaughters, Isla and Marissa Ellery. There it was. Quiet on the surface, but the impact was immediate. Marissa sprang to her feet, her chair dragging loudly across the wood floor. What? She snapped, voice sharp. He gave her the annex? The entire research facility? Her voice wavered, brittle with disbelief. That's outrageous! She turned to our parents, pointing with a trembling hand. You told me, she said, her voice cracking. You said it would all go to me. That if I just kept showing up, kept being nice to him, kept smiling, that everything would be mine. My father pressed his lips into a hard line, saying nothing. My mother kept her gaze locked on the floor, like it might swallow her whole. I remained still, just watching everything begin to come apart. Mr. Callister raised one hand gently. There's more, he said. Mr. Ellery also left a personal letter addressed to Isla, with instructions that it be read aloud in the presence of the family. Marissa gave a bitter, hollow laugh, but no one joined her. Grandma reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a folded letter. He wrote this the week before he passed, she said quietly. He made me promise to deliver it. The lawyer took it carefully, unfolding the creased paper with the patience of someone handling something sacred. Granddad's handwriting, bold and steady, filled the page. To my beloved Isla, Mr. Callister began. If you're hearing this, then I'm no longer by your side, but know that my belief in you is stronger than ever. The words moved through me like a warm current. You were always the quiet one, the thinker, the one who paused to ask why when others didn't bother to care. Marissa dropped back into her chair, defeated. My mother twisted her fingers in her lap. My father turned to stare out the window. You shaped your own truth in a family that never knew how to honor it. Something in me shifted. Not anger, not vengeance. Just something clear. Settled. You were never in error. You were the legacy I was most proud of. Tears gathered in my eyes, but I held my gaze forward. I wanted every single word heard. All of it. Mr. Callister continued, voice calm, even as the letter transformed the air in the room. I remember the way you clutched that little blue notebook when you were 7, measuring how long it took rain to fill a cup. I remember how your eyes lit up when you found connections in things no one else noticed. My chest ached. I still had that notebook tucked away. I saw the way your light dimmed when your mother brushed you aside. He read. The way your father would change the subject whenever you tried to share something you were proud of. I heard my mother suck in a breath. I didn't look her way. Marissa had always been the easier one for them. The letter continued. She sparkled in the ways they recognized. But you, Isla, you shone in a way they never learned to see. And instead of trying to understand your light, they closed the door on it. Marissa shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I don't place all the blame on her. She did what they expected, played the role they handed her. But you made your own path. And that, my girl, takes courage. A tear slid down my cheek. I didn't brush it away. I remember the day you won your first science competition. You asked me to hide the trophy. You said, maybe if they don't see it, they'll stop acting like I don't belong here. From across the room, someone let out a strained breath. Maybe my father. You didn't need to be hidden, Isla. You needed to be seen, to be celebrated. And though I can't change what was taken from you, I can leave you something that's yours alone. A place where you can build without apology, without their shadows standing in the way." Mr. Callister paused, folding the letter with care. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with old wounds, realization, and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. I cleared my throat. "I remember that day," I said quietly, breaking the silence. "The science fair. Mom didn't come. She was at Marissa's recital." Marissa flinched. "I came home holding that trophy like it was something I should be ashamed of." At last, my father spoke. "Isla, this isn't the moment to revisit the past." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "It's the only moment. Because all I ever heard from either of you was, 'Why can't you be more like your sister?' Then I turned to Marissa, and from you, anytime I tried to be proud of myself, you made sure it felt like a challenge." She let out a scoff. "Oh, please. You've always played the victim. I actually earned what I have." I nodded slowly. "You mean you showed up to visit Granddad when it suited you, smiled on cue, said what they wanted to hear, because you thought it would get you something?" Marissa's jaw tightened. "And you think you're some kind of saint? You disappeared for years." "No," I said sharply. "I was pushed out. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her. You gave Granddad a fake number so I'd never get his calls. That's not distance, Marissa. That's erasure." My mother suddenly stood, her voice rising. "That's enough, Isla. You're twisting this. This family has been through a lot." "This family," Grandma cut in, her tone fierce, "has been built on lies. And I let it go on for far too long." My mother turned to her, stunned. "Mom, don't—" "I watched you all ignore Isla's pain," Grandma said. "And I believed you when you told me she didn't care. I should have known better." My father shifted in his seat, clearly uneasy. "Look, Isla got her degrees, her internships, her programs. That wasn't nothing." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "It wasn't. But you didn't pay for any of it. Granddad did. Every part of it, the scholarships he found, the flights, the materials. You didn't even know where I was half the time." I swallowed hard. "You made me feel like a burden. He made me feel like I mattered." Marissa stood, voice rising. "This is absurd. I was told the estate was mine. I stayed. I was the good one." "No," I said, my voice level. "You were the one who played the role, the favorite. I was the one kept out of sight, but Granddad never forgot me, and now you don't get to write me out again." Her face twisted. "And why do you deserve anything? Just because you're some moody little genius in a lab coat?" I gave a faint smile. "No, I'm not owed anything. I get something because he loved me, truly. And that's what you never understood. Love isn't earned through performance." Then Grandma rose from her chair. Her movements were slow, but she stood with absolute purpose. "I regret that Nolan left you anything," she said, eyes locked on Marissa. "You may have acted the part, but it was never out of love. It was a transaction. And I'm ashamed I didn't recognize it sooner." She turned to face the rest of them. "Leave. You're not welcome here." My mother gasped. "Mom, please." "Out," Grandma said again, firmer this time. "Now." No one moved at first. Then Marissa grabbed her purse and strode out, heels cracking sharply against the floorboards. My parents followed behind her, murmuring about legal appeals, stunned by the loss of control. But for the first time in my life, they were leaving empty-handed. The door closed gently behind them, not slammed, not rushed, just done. I stood still, unsure what I was supposed to feel. The room was quiet now, not strained or suffocating. Just quiet. Clear. Grandma walked past me and sank slowly onto the couch. Her hands, which had trembled just moments ago, now lay still in her lap. "They'll be back," I said softly. "They always come back." "Maybe," she replied, "but this time we don't have to open the door." It took me a moment to absorb that. For so long, I'd been living under an unspoken agreement. If I succeeded enough, worked hard enough, proved my value, maybe then they'd see me. Maybe they'd call me daughter or sister or family without hesitation. But standing there with the weight of my grandfather's words still echoing in the room, I finally understood something painfully simple. I had spent years trying to earn love from people who never had it to give, and Nolan, he had seen that long before I did. "I think I need some air," I said quietly. Grandma gave a small nod, and I stepped out onto the back porch. The wooden boards creaked under my feet, a sound that once meant belonging. Now it felt like transition. The magnolia trees still bloomed in the far corner of the yard. Beyond the fence, the same patch of red earth waited. The place where Granddad once helped me build my very first greenhouse. The structure had caved in after just 2 weeks, but he'd called it the perfect failure, and we'd laughed about it for years. I thought about that version of me, 10 years old, knees scraped, eyes bright, and wondered how long she'd been buried beneath everyone else's expectations. When I stepped back inside, Grandma had put the kettle on the stove. Her movements were slower now, but every one of them was intentional. "You know," she said, not turning around, "Nolan started designing that research annex 5 years ago, before he ever got sick." I looked up, surprised. He told me he wanted to build a space where you wouldn't need anyone's approval to be yourself. The tears came before I could stop them, quiet. No sobbing, just a clean, steady release. That night I stayed in my childhood room for the first time in years. The wallpaper had faded, and the mattress was far too soft, but the ceiling still had those glow-in-the-dark stars, the ones Granddad helped me arrange when I was 9. I'd insisted they follow actual star maps. He hadn't questioned it for a second. Lying there, I realized something I hadn't expected. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like it belonged again, to us. The next morning, I brewed coffee for both of us and brought it to the old kitchen table, the one I used to avoid whenever my parents were around. Grandma looked up from her folded newspaper and gave me a tired but genuine smile. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "I think I go see it," I said. "The annex, the lab." She nodded. He'd want that. I glanced out the window, where soft light spilled through the magnolia branches. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel the need to escape, to prove something, or to explain who I was. I didn't feel unseen, and that, more than any amount of money, more than a list of assets, was the first true gift I had ever received from this family. Because the one person who had believed in me hadn't just left behind a legacy. He'd left me something far more valuable, permission to begin again. The first time I saw the annex, it didn't look like a research facility. It looked like a converted barn. And that's exactly what it was, sitting quietly at the end of a dusty stretch off Laurel Creek. The building had thick wooden beams, a rusted tin roof, and a pair of double doors that looked more suited for livestock than a laboratory. But inside, it felt like wonder. The space had been completely transformed. Floor-to-ceiling glass lined the east wall, filling the room with early sunlight. Work tables were neatly arranged, each one outfitted with pristine lab equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, digital tablets, even a 3D printer still wrapped in its packaging. Shelves stood along the back wall, stacked with unopened boxes, each one marked with my name. And in the center of the room sat a broad workbench. On top of it, my old notebook, the one I'd lost during my last year of college. The cover was scuffed, the corners bent, pages torn in places, but it was unmistakable. Inside were my early diagrams of bee behavior, scrawled notes, wild theories. I nearly collapsed right there. Nolan hadn't just built me a laboratory, he had built a sanctuary, a home for my mind. Over the next few weeks, I moved in full-time. I brought in 2 former classmates from my graduate program, Tara and Micah, both of whom shared the same unshakable belief that science didn't have to be cold to be credible. We started with small steps, a local grant to study micro-irrigation systems, then a collaboration with a regional farming network to test crop rotation models rooted in sustainability. We failed often, broke equipment, cried over rejected proposals and data that didn't make sense. But every morning, we came back. I opened the doors to a space that didn't question who I was. A space that never asked me to tone it down, justify my passion, or pretend to be someone simpler. Here, ideas were tested, not mocked. Intensity wasn't treated like a flaw, and curiosity wasn't something to shrink. One afternoon, after yet another difficult grant rejection, I stayed late at the annex. The others had already gone home. The lights were low. I was sitting on the floor beside the supply closet, surrounded by crumpled notes and cold coffee cups. I reached into my bag and pulled out Nolan's letter, the one I'd asked Mr. Callister to give back. Mr. Callister had agreed to let me keep the letter. I unfolded it again, smoothing the creases with care, and found the line I must have read 100 times by now. I whispered it aloud into the quiet. "You wrote your own role." It wasn't just a phrase of support, it was a directive. That same night, I began writing a new grant proposal, not for another research device or data model, but for a youth science program focused on students in rural communities. A program for kids like I had once been, quiet, thoughtful, often overlooked. We named it the Little Scientists Initiative. In our first year, we worked with just 12 students. They came from towns where classrooms still relied on outdated materials, where a microscope had never been part of a science lesson. We gave each student a leather-bound notebook, a replica of the one I'd used as a child, with Nolan's words printed on the first page. "Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will." That fall, a reserved girl named Amber, barely 13, hair always tucked into her face, approached me after class with a handful of handwritten pages. She'd been documenting the behavior of local bees on her own time. Her data was messy, her writing scattered, but her insight sharp, alive. When I told her how impressed I was, she looked at me like I'd handed her the stars. "You actually read it?" she whispered. I smiled. Of course I did. And in that moment, something clicked. This wasn't about recovering what I had lost. It was about growing something new, somewhere it could thrive without fear. 3 years after the reading of the will, an email arrived. It wasn't from Mr. Callister, but from a different law office, someone representing Marissa Ellery. The subject line was brief, request for visit, Isla Ellery Innovation Annex. At first, I assumed it was trouble. Maybe a new attempt to contest the inheritance or reopen some forgotten clause. Another push to drag back a past we'd already let rest. But when Marissa stepped through the door, I almost didn't recognize her. The heels were gone, the styled hair, the carefully coordinated outfits. She wore no makeup, and her navy coat hung loosely from her shoulders, like it belonged to someone else. She stepped into the main entrance slowly, as if unsure whether she belonged. I stood beside Nolan's portrait, which hung above the welcome desk. She paused when her eyes met it. "He always saw you clearly," she said softly. "Even when I didn't. Especially when I didn't." For a moment, I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. "I'd like to see it," she said. "The lab, the work, what you've done with it." I could have declined, but I didn't. I gave her the tour. We walked through the greenhouse domes, the crop research wing, and the student showcase wall lined with photos from our Little Scientists program. She said little, asked a few quiet, genuine questions. "How do you fund all this? What's this tool for? Do the kids get to share their research anywhere?" When we reached the community garden, a space where local families used our sustainable methods to grow their own produce, she stopped walking. A group of kids were picking lettuce nearby. A woman and her son were laughing beside the compost station. A father knelt beside his daughter, showing her how to test soil with one of our field kits. Marissa turned toward me, Her voice was unsteady. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I didn't respond. "I just wanted to see what he built for you and what you made of it." She didn't cry, but her hands gave her away, tugging at her sleeves, tracing circles along the edge of the railing. I let her stay as long as she wanted. No lectures, no bitterness, just quiet honesty. We don't speak often, but twice a year now, Marissa returns as a volunteer for the youth science camp. She helps the students with public speaking, how to explain their findings in simple terms, how to stand tall while doing it. The kids adore her. Some even call her Coach V. At the end of her first summer with us, she handed me a folder. "I wrote something," she said, almost sheepishly, "a guide for the quiet ones. Thought it might help." I opened it that evening. It wasn't flawless, but it was thoughtful, gentle, sincere. And for the first time, I saw a version of my sister I didn't have to be afraid of. She never gave a formal apology, not with words, but she shows up. And that matters. It's more than I ever expected, and maybe, just maybe, it's enough. We're not sisters in the way most people think of it. But here, in this small corner of the world Nolan dreamed into existence, we've stopped pretending. And somehow, that feels like the start of something real. It's been 6 years since the day of the will reading, 6 years since the front door clicked shut behind my parents and Marissa, their footsteps trailing down the porch like the close of a show no one applauded. I haven't spoken to my parents since. Occasionally I see their names pop up in email subject lines I don't open, on donor lists, or attached to financial news out of Florida where they retired early. I don't feel anger, but I don't feel longing either. What I think about now is the work. The annex has become something larger than I ever imagined. What began as a single renovated barn has grown into a full-scale research campus. 4 active labs, 3 greenhouses, and more than 60 acres of test fields. We've developed drought-resistant crop varieties that are now feeding thousands in southern regions where conventional farming can't survive. We've partnered with universities from Kenya to Brazil, sharing knowledge in regenerative agriculture. And just last month, I stood beneath stage lights in San Francisco to receive a national award for climate innovation. The lights were sharp, but I didn't flinch. I wore a dark blue suit, and in the inside pocket, I carried Nolan's watch, the one Grandma gave me last year, his initials barely visible inside the lid. Inside was a small photo tucked neatly behind the glass. It was me, age 10, standing proudly beside my first science fair project on bee communication, grinning like nothing else in the world mattered. He carried that photo every day, Grandma had told me. Now it sits on my desk at the annex, right where the morning sun filters through and casts little rings of gold across my research notes. Some days I still speak to him, not out loud, but in the stillness. When a project fails, when a student from our program earns a scholarship, or when I catch myself remembering how close I came to thinking I didn't matter, I think of him. He never let me vanish, not truly. And now I understand why. Legacy isn't something carved in stone, it's a trail, made of choices, kindness, and the quiet markers someone leaves behind for others to find when the world tries to erase them. These days, Grandma lives in a small apartment attached to my home in town. Her pace is slower now, her memory softer around the edges, but when it matters, she's still the sharpest person I know. Each morning we sit together in the sunroom, sipping coffee. She shares stories about Nolan I'd never heard before, like how he planted a tree as part of his proposal, how he believed soil could hold on to acts of care, or how he was always certain I'd return. And maybe he was right. Maybe I needed to leave to understand what coming back could truly mean. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I walk to the far edge of the annex grounds, past the solar irrigation systems, past the students' garden plots, until I reach the old bench Nolan built himself. From there, the sky opens wide. I can see the stars. Not the plastic ones I once pressed to my ceiling, but the real constellations, alive and distant. Still, they make me think of that younger version of myself, the girl who kept asking questions no one wanted to answer, the girl who never stopped wondering, the girl he believed in. And on certain nights, when the breeze threads gently through the trees, I swear I hear his voice in the rustling leaves. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will, and now, finally, it does.